Hi everybody, welcome to Kembali 2020, a Rebuild Bali Festival, a digital program designed to inspire, excite, reconnect, and revitalize the Balinese and Indonesian community from 29 October until 8 November 2020. Kembali, the Indonesian word for return or comeback, represents revitalization in the face of global challenges. The festival will unite people in Bali and Indonesia together with an international audience at a time when travel is largely impossible and creating connections is more important than ever before. We are honored today to have Kevin Kwan with us from Los Angeles. Kevin's widely successful Crazy Rich Asians trilogy is a global phenomenon, topping the bestseller charts worldwide. The movie adaptation, as you know, of the first book, Crazy Rich Asians, was also a roaring blockbuster, reaping 24 million worldwide, and dare I say, setting a benchmark for Asian portrayal in contemporary cinema with its all Asian cast. His latest book, Sex and Vanity, was released on 30 June. It's an instant bestseller, a very timely read, I should add, in our current distressing time, where we are all grounded from traveling to Capri, the Hamptons, or New York, where the book is set. It essentially tells the story of a girl, Lucy, who meets a boy, George, and their fateful encounter in Capri unleashes a world of WASP, decadent destination wedding, lavish meal, exotic setting, haute couture, social climbing ambitions, and mixing over the top and yet heartfelt moments that only a Kevin Kwan can pull off. Hello, Kevin. Thank you for joining
Hello.
us.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I could actually be in Ubud right now.
Yeah, it is what it is, right? How is life at your end in LA?
I think, we're coping like everyone else. We're trying to, make the best out of the situation. I'm grateful that the weather has cleared up. We were having forest fires in Northern
Yes.
California, and it made the sky and the water air quality quite bad for a while. But things have cleared up now, and it's cooling down a bit. So it's one day at a time. Every day I find something new to be grateful for or try to.
How long have you lived there now?
I have now lived in LA a little bit over 2 years, full time.
Okay,
Yeah. Before that, I was really commuting between LA and New York all the time.
okay. To say that this year is odd year is probably an understatement, right? But you release a book, but there is no book signing and there is no book tour for you this year. And the rest of us are at home with no travel plans whatsoever. When you wrote this book down, did it ever occur to you that it would be released in such a strange time?
I mean, never in my wildest imagination. I actually had a very short time to write the book because I was so busy with other film and TV projects. So I wrote this book in 4 months, and then I was
Oh,
going to go
wow.
back to working on a TV project, and then I was going to start touring for the book, starting in June. And I was planning to be traveling all around the world, Asia, Europe, you know rest of the US. It was going to be like a 6 month tour, and never thought I'd be doing all my touring from home.
You told me like you've worked on this book for 4 months. Like did you write it when you were in LA?
Yes, I wrote it
Okay.
primarily in LA. I mean, my intention was to actually write it on the island of Capri. That's the whole reason.
Okay. That would be
I I
ideal,
I
right?
know that was how I conceived the idea, and I was planning to write it in Capri, but then my schedule just got so busy that I had to
Okay.
just I just had to discipline myself and write it in LA. I couldn't take the time to travel to Italy to
Okay.
write the book.
I'll ask you more about the Capri part later because it's such a
Yeah.
profound part of the book, right? But the title Sex and Vanity, I think it sums up the book perfectly. Did you find it before or after the book is written?
It's interesting. I already had the idea for this book. The story and the idea for the book has been sort of in my mind for about 10 years. It's been really a fantasy of mine to write this book. And originally I had a very different title planned for the
Okay.
book. Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna call the book Ocean View Room.
Okay. As a
Yeah.
nod to the room with the view.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Okay.
then I was having lunch one day with some friends, and they have a teenage son. He was probably about 16, 17 at the time, in high school. But he was very unusual in that he was one of these high schoolers who didn't believe in social media. He was not on Instagram, he wasn't on Twitter or Facebook or any of the other TikTok, whatever. He really wanted to live in the real world. He didn't want to live in the virtual world. And we were talking about that because that's, quite unusual. Most teenagers I know are just glued to their phones all the time, right?
Yes.
And I wanted to know why, what was his intention? And he was talking about, oh, he just thinks it's all a waste of time. And he said, look at Instagram. Instagram is nothing but sex and vanity. That's what it's all about. And I thought about it, and
And
that's like, you know what? You're actually quite right. For a lot of people, Instagram really is about sex and vanity. But then I thought, that's such a great combination of words, and it really sums up so much of the themes that I'm looking at in my book, and the themes that sort of are so prevalent in modern society today. So
that's a
he gave me
very
the name.
that's a very good story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
Okay, so
17-year-old teenager.
yes, very wise, no?
Yeah, very, very wise beyond his
Very
years. Yeah,
wise one. Yes. And Sex and Vanity is a homage to one of your favorite book, right? The M. Forster, Room with a View. Even
that
you
is
name the
correct.
characters, the main characters, according to the classic book. But unlike the restricted era of the Edwardian culture of that classic book, yours is set during our era of excess and, like you said, sex and vanity, and it's even no longer frowned upon, and even encouraged at some point, right? And how did you combine, or how did you put these two together?
Well, I had always loved the book, first of all, and I loved the way E.M. Forster, looked at his character, his Lucy. Her name was Lucy Honeychurch, and
Yes.
for him, Lucy Honeychurch was a girl that was, on the verge of womanhood, but she was also caught between two time periods. She's living in 1908, which is, the Edwardian period, but so many of her values and what she's really kind of bound to are the Victorian era values. So I think she really was caught between two time periods, two worlds.
Okay.
And in my book, my Lucy Tang Churchill, is also, caught up, but in very different ways. She's caught between two cultures. She's biracial, so she's got a Chinese side. Her mother's Chinese, her father is, native Caucasian New Yorker, and she's caught between two cultures, East and West, and she's also caught between two class systems, old money and new money.
Yes.
So I wanted to really play those dualities, in my Lucy. And of course, I'm telling a story about a modern woman, with completely different problems than the Lucy of 1908. But yet there's a kinship, Yet I think so many of the struggles that they go through more
The
than a
old
century
Lucy and the
apart,
new Lucy.
yeah,
Yes.
are so relatable to each other, I think.
That's a wonderful way to put
Yeah.
it. And I noticed there's a lot of moments in the book where Lucy, especially because of her East and West heritage, encounters some racism, right? From like a very small, just a small dose until, yeah, and it gave her like this uncertainty, insecurity um, towards herself, right?
Yeah, I wanted to look at, there's so many different types of racism that exist. Racism is racism, first of all. But,
Yes.
I think there are subtleties in it, and especially in this culture, and I speak of the American culture, for a girl growing up who
Yes.
is not completely Caucasian, who is not completely white, um, as Lucy is, she goes through all these microaggressions. She goes through, her whole life. There are all these little things. I call them like 1,000 paper cuts that accumulate over the years. Little comments made by a cousin here. Her grandmother, it calls her by a very racist nickname, and the grandmother's not even aware of how racist she is. So I really wanted to highlight a different facet of racism. How you can be racist even towards people you love unintentionally. Number one,
Yes.
and I also wanted to show how racism can exist in very educated classes, in very upper classes. It's not just something that's restricted to the ignorant and the lower classes. So it was a way to really tell this story and give a multifaceted view at all the various issues surrounding racism in America.
Okay. And you live most of your adult life there, right? Although you were born in Singapore.
I lived all my adult life in the US. Yeah,
In the US.
Exactly. I moved from Singapore when I was 11 years old.
Okay. Was there any particular experience or moment that truly inspired you to create her character and, her exposure to racism?
So many. I mean, not just for myself,
Yes.
but really, I was really looking at the experience of being biracial in America, being caught between two cultures.
Yes.
And it's a very particular problem, that I've seen. And it's not necessarily a problem, but I see how I have different friends and family members who are like Lucy, biracial, and every single one of them has a very unique, individualized experience of racism. Lucy, for example, she looks more Chinese, and so she gets treated, in a different way than her brother, Freddie, who presents as much more white. He gets treated and he grows up having a whole different set of issues than she does. So that was interesting for me to see that, because I have had friends, for example, who grew up biracial in Singapore, and in Singapore, it's such a multicultural society, right? No one really cares.
Yeah.
If anything, being biracial, you're seen as, in a way, maybe even a little bit special.
Yes. Yeah, you're adored. That's the ideal
Exactly.
beauty,
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So like I had a friend who experienced that in Singapore and then moved to the US, and suddenly, in his high school, everyone just saw him as, oh, here's the Asian kid, another Asian kid. And for the first time ever, he experienced, a high degree of racism. And he didn't even see himself as a Chinese kid, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everyone has a different story, and there's no monolithic experience, amongst biracial people. So I really wanted to try to do justice to that and tell a very nuanced story about my character and what she goes through.
Beautiful. And do tell us about the most joyful part of the whole research. Did you truly go to all of this location, eating pasta, buying leather shoes, tailor-made leather shoes, and how familiar are you with this location, Capri, the Hamptons in New York?
Unfortunately, I have no imagination, right? So I can only write about places that I've actually been to and experienced. I'm very much like a journalist. I'm an observer. If I have to see it and smell it and taste it in order for me to write about it. So yeah, unfortunately, I had to go to Capri many times and do research and eat the food and enjoy the pasta. And no, I'm just kidding. I mean, really, it's one of my favorite islands in the world. So it's a place where I've really been lucky enough to visit quite a few times. And it's really an enchanting island. And that's why I wanted to set this story there, because it is so special. There's such a special mix of history and archaeology and beauty and style and food and nature. So I wanted to incorporate all those things that I've seen and enjoyed on that island into the book.
Okay.
And then your other question was about the Hamptons. Yes, I lived in New York for 2 decades, and so many of my summers were spent out in the Hamptons. And there I was able to really observe, that tribe of the Hamptons social scene that I satirize in Sex and Vanity.
Okay, so basically, it's distilled from your 2 decades of experience living and mingling among the rich and the nouveau rich, and then the old money and the new money, right?
Occasionally mingling, put it this way. I don't spend all my time with that crowd. Yeah, most of the time living in New York, I'm a writer. I live the life of a writer, and most of my friends are um are not part of the jet set.
um, will there be any other book featuring these characters? I mean, as you did with the previous trilogy. I mean, I would definitely love to meet Lucy, George, and even Cecil again.
Hmm. I mean, never say never, but right now,
Okay.
my intention with this new book, and it's a new trilogy, but it's
Okay.
not a conventional trilogy in that Lucy's story is complete. It's finished now for the most part.
Okay.
And the
Okay.
next book is going to be about a different character.
Characters. Okay.
But the link is through cities. I'm calling this my cities trilogy because this
Okay.
first book is really kind of, to me, my love letter to Capri and to New York. The next book will be my love letter to London and another city, which I will keep secret for the time being. And the
Okay.
third book, the final book in the trilogy, is going to be
Okay.
Paris. Paris.
Oh,
Yeah. So
city
it's
of
going to be New
love.
York, London, Paris. And Lucy might make an appearance in the next book or the third book, but she won't be the main character. It'll be other people, but you'll see the link through the cities.
Okay. But one question you told me earlier, like you have no imagination, which I don't believe at all, but you need to research and sort of like immerse yourself in the location, right? To be able to write it, like get it accurately. And now with this current situation where we are like sort of bound where we are, how do you plan the writing part of the rest of the books?
Well, I'm actually hoping, I'm hoping and praying that we'll be able to travel again next year. And that's when I'm going
Okay.
to really be able to do research in London for the next book. But, if we aren't able to travel next year, I guess I'll just have to write from memory. London is also a city I also know very well.
Okay.
So, I will use my memory and I'll use Google Earth and do a lot of Googling to see places. But I
Yeah,
really hope that I can travel again because there's nothing like being in a place. I like to
true.
go to cities and sit down at a cafe that's outdoors and really watch the world go by and watch the people. And I get so much inspiration from just people watching and seeing how people
Yes.
behave. So I hope to be able to do that in real time as I write the next book.
And as a writer, like I always assume like there's a feeling that there's before COVID and after COVID. So your next books probably will take place after COVID, right?
I'm hoping so. I'm
You
hoping there's an
know,
after COVID.
and yeah,
Yeah,
no, I mean, and it sort of changes, right? I
it
mean,
does.
how do you kind of combine the reality of it? Because our lives now are not the same anymore. There
Yeah.
will be
Well,
tons of movies and books and things written and made to incorporate these elements, right?
exactly.
How
Well, I'll
how
tell you a
how
little
do you?
secret. I'll tell you a
Okay.
little secret. Sex and Vanity, the book I just wrote, was
Yes.
supposed to finish. The story was supposed to end in 2020. In the book now,
Okay.
it ends in 2019. But originally, I was writing it, and it was going to end in May 2020. And I don't want to ruin it for
Oh.
many of the readers out there, but after I wrote it, I realized it's impossible to end the book the way I wanted it to in May 2020 because no one's traveling in May 2020. Capri
Correct.
was under,
Yeah.
you know, Capri was under lockdown. No one could go there. And so I had to backdate my book to end in 2019.
Yes.
And because of that, I had to move even further back. When the story begins, it used to begin in 2014. Now it starts in 2013. So I had to do a lot of juggling around already. And even moving the story back a year, it's amazing how many things that I had to change because of, I used so many pop cultural references in my book. And so I would have to check all these things that has this happened yet? Did that happen? Did that not happen? So it really, even moving it a year back caused a lot of turmoil. But but to answer your question fully, post COVID, yeah, it will be interesting to see how it changes the characters. Because certainly I think this whole experience has changed me. It's still changing me. So I think
Yes.
it will also affect how the characters think and act in the future.
Yeah, that will be,
Yeah,
yeah, that's the challenges that we face now, right? When we create something during this time. But yeah,
exactly.
it's not all gloom and doom. I hear that Sony Pictures and SK Global just acquired the film right of Sex and Vanity. Congratulations for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. You know, there it's to me the great thing about being in LA is that Hollywood is such an optimistic industry, you know,
Yes.
and they're really looking to the future. I mean, they're already back to filming actually. I mean, I have friends who are actors who are filming again. You know, they're doing it in very safe ways. Of course, there are all these health measures and distance, so they're
Tasks.
social distance
Yeah.
filming. You know, it's amazing, but they're finding
Okay.
amazing ways to do it where it doesn't look like everyone's 10 feet apart. But
Okay.
they're already because Hollywood is in the business of creating all these magical films and TV and all these entertainment things, and so the show must go on, right? So Sony's already very excited, and the plan is they really want to shoot the movie next summer
Next summer.
already.
Oh, that's
Next summer,
great.
exactly. So I'm
Oh,
like, yes,
okay.
please. I hope we can all make that happen.
Yeah, and we definitely can do with more, joy and adventure in our lives, right?
Yeah, I would love to be in Capri next summer. Let's see if that can happen. I'm gonna knock on wood
Yeah.
here.
But there is a truly a cinematic quality to the book when I read through it. Like apart from the obviously dramatic setting and the
Hmm.
weddings and the beautiful, good-looking characters in it, there is a cinematic quality of your writings, and not just this book, but also the previous trilogy. Was it part of your I don't know, technique probably? Like, do you imagine it? How do you visualize it when you write it down? Do you imagine that it's a movie in your head, or
I do. I'm a very visual writer. First of all, I have to
okay,
imagine scenes when I create a scene. I have to really imagine the space, and then I design the space, and even the characters, everything they're wearing from head to toe. I have to imagine their whole outfits. Yeah, I've always had a very sort of cinematic vision when I write, and I am also very inspired by cinema in my writing, because I love movies. I'm a huge movie buff. And of course, this book
okay,
especially was inspired not just by A Room of a View, the novel, it was also
yes,
inspired by the movie. I mean, there was a beautiful movie made of A Room of View back in the 80s that starred, some of the most
the
amazing English
merchant, the
actors.
merchant ivory,
The
was
Merchant
it?
Ivory one. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay, I've
Helena
seen that
Bonham
one. Yeah.
Carter, Daniel Day-Lewis was in that, Maggie Smith, all these amazing, and that's one of my favorite movies of all time. So definitely the visual, the sensuality, the five senses really came into play. And I
Okay.
also, in this book, I played a little sort of trick in that I pay tribute to a lot of my favorite directors, movie
Okay.
directors in this
Tell us
book. So you'll
more.
see these
Yes.
names, for example, the hotel that they stay in Capri, that my characters stay in, Lucy and Charlotte. It's called the
Okay.
Hotel Bertolucci, because I love the director Bernardo
Bernardo. Oh,
Bertolucci,
okay.
and then so you'll
Okay.
see throughout the book there's sprinkled in many of my
Okay.
favorite directors, Claire Denis, the French director, Eugene Green, another one that's a favorite. So it flows through the entire book. I don't want to ruin it for people, but that's one way to read my book, to look for the directors' names.
But that's always has been my favorite thing to do in your reading your book. One is the footnotes, which is very fun to read.
Thank you.
And because I read it on Kindle this time, it makes it even easier, right? Because you just click on
You can click and click,
tablet.
yeah.
Correct. And then yeah, it's just wonderful. And you still keep you even had the cameo of a old character from the previous trilogy, right? One of the most outrageous one showing up as a that's a very
no
naughty, yeah.
no
Yeah.
spoilers.
But I love
Exactly,
that
but
part
yeah,
of cameo. Yeah, it's all the
yeah,
small bits and pieces. And also
little
like your
Easter eggs, as I call it.
Easter eggs. Okay, that's
Yeah.
a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And I also like really admire your references. You know, like most of us, we don't get an access to this world of the privilege, right? And then here you are, like dropping a hint, as you say, your Easter eggs, hidden it, tucking it in very carefully here and there. And I think a lot of people. I had this conversation with a friend the other day, and you know exactly like the point where only the people in the know can access that information in a book, like certain brand or certain designer's name, like most people probably haven't unheard of, but only like a very selected few knew about. How did you incorporate these small things? Like how many books you read, or how did you find out about these things?
I don't really know. You know, there's a lot of useless information in my mind, I think. I just put it into my books. But no, you know, I'm such a consumer of culture, of pop culture. I read so many magazines. I'm watching movies, TV shows, documentaries all the time. And then of course I travel a lot. So I see a lot. And whenever I travel, I really try to look and find interesting, authentic things, you know, whether it's a shoemaker or a jeweler or a perfumer or an architect. I'm always interested in seeing what's happening on the local scene. Who are the artisans? You know, who's really involved in creating exquisite craft? And those are the people I want to feature and help, you know, showcase in my
Mm,
books.
okay. And have you ever heard about this story where, like, is it like one of the leather shoemaker that you mentioned? Is it real? Is it an
Oh
actual shop?
yes,
Or
absolutely. Absolutely.
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
that's
funny
amazing.
because yeah, I mean, it's actually, you know, it's a shoe company. It's a sandal maker that's been in business for 2 generations now in Capri. You know,
Okay,
Capri is an island of sandal makers.
okay.
That's one of the most beautiful things they create on that island. So there are a few world renowned sandal makers, shoemakers in Capri. You know, and they're all rivals, of course. You know, but I discovered this one which I really liked, Da Costanzo, and you know, it's now run by Antonio. He makes all the sandals. In fact, I'm wearing a pair right now. I'll hold it up.
Do show it to
You know,
us.
yeah, this
Oh my
is and
God,
this is
that's
this is
beautiful.
maybe at least, you know, I'm sorry to be showing my dirty shoe, but this is like maybe 15 years old, but it's still
Oh
so
wow.
comfortable. You
Yeah.
know, they're made to last a lifetime because he makes
Yes,
them by
leather,
hand.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
leather, you know, he makes them by hand. And his father made them. You know, the father was the original sandal maker, and the father made these shoes for some of the most famous people in the world. You know, Jackie Onassis,
Oh
Audrey Hepburn,
wow.
Grace Kelly,
Okay.
Cary Grant, you know, all these, you know, rich and famous and beautiful came and bought sandals from him. So I discovered
True.
his sandal shop and started buying sandals there because I just love wearing sandals. You know, like even since I was a little boy, I'm running around in flip flops. I hate wearing shoes. I hate wearing socks. You know, and
So
so I
talk,
wore his
yeah.
shoes, and
So
I
mhm.
wrote about his sandals in. I think the first time I mentioned him was in China Rich Girlfriend, my second
Okay.
novel, the sequel
Yes.
to Crazy Rich Asians.
Okay.
And so I wrote it, the book came out, and then maybe 2 years later I went to Capri again and I went to see Antonio to get more shoes made. And I saw my book sitting
There?
next to his, well, it was next to his little cobbler's bench where he makes the sandals. And I was like, oh wow. And he goes, yeah, I'm reading this because I'm in this book. And I said, I know, I wrote this book. You know, I'd known him for about 10 years at this point, and he didn't know I was a writer. You know, he
Okay.
just knows me as the guy that comes in from and buys shoes, you know, from him. Um, so it's pretty funny. Um,
Imagine his surprise then finding, finding himself in the shop like featured prominently in your new book.
yeah,
Has he
exactly.
read
I don't
it?
know. I don't know if he has, but even with China Rich Girlfriend, the only way he heard about it was because people were coming into the store with the book, you know,
Oh my
saying, "Oh, I
God.
want you to make me the sandal that Astrid wears." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what sandal she's wearing."
Which
Um,
aspect, right?
yeah, exactly. Which Astrid? So it was pretty funny.
Okay, and yeah, talk about supporting artisans, as you said before. Yeah, I mean, like okay, it's maybe not apple to apple, but say we're from Bali here, right? And then we
An
felt it
island of amazing
profoundly.
artisans.
Yes, and then we felt it profoundly when a certain bestseller book was written and the setting was here. I think you know what I refer to, right?
Um,
Probably.
I was it you? Is it Eat, Pray, Love?
Yes,
Yeah,
correct. And then it changed the whole places, especially Ubud,
yeah.
right? I mean,
I can
before
only imagine.
that, yes. And when you write this down, as you said, of course, these places are already famous for centuries. People go
Hmm.
there all the time. But like Singapore, for instance, in your previous trilogy, a lot of people are probably worldwide are exposed now to the oh wow, I didn't know Singapore was like that, and it sort of changed the idea, right, of a
Yeah,
place.
I
Yeah,
think that's what books do, and movies especially,
most movies
do even
especially,
more.
right?
I
Yes,
think Eat, Pray, Love the movie probably did even more to put Bali on the map for tourists than the book. But yeah, but I try to be very sensitive, whenever I set
okay,
my books at different places. And for example, there's some places I will not write about because I want to keep
okay.
them sacred. I don't want too many people invading. And sometimes things get ruined when it's too popular.
There you go.
So,
Yes,
I mean, Antonio was already one of the most famous sandal makers in the world. I didn't, I'm not going to ruin his business by telling people about him. And there's certain restaurants I write about and play, in all my books. It's I mention places that I know can handle the exposure,
okay.
and
So
then there
you're
are some
mindful
places
about it as
I'm very
well.
mindful about that. Yeah, because the last thing I ever
Okay.
want to do is ruin a place, ruin a country, ruin an island, especially an island. Because when it's
Yes.
so small and it's a small
Yeah.
community, I want to keep things as appropriate as possible.
Okay. Oh
I
wow, that's
try at least.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, how do you feel like okay, these characters that you create in the previous trilogy and then in this book as well, they have lived so vividly only in your head as the writer. How did you feel when you see them, turning into a real person like it did with the adaptation of the Crazy Rich Asians?
It's a very, very weird sensation to see a character, that you've created come to life as it's performed by an actor. And for me, it was, one of the coolest things ever, that in my life experience to see that happen. But it's also very confusing because I would look at these actors, for example, and I would see they all felt like they were my children in a way, you know what I mean? In a very strange way. And also because many of the characters in the Crazy Rich Asians books are based on real people, right?
Okay.
I would
Yes.
think of the real people as I see these actors acting and performing the character. And of course, I would relate them back and forth. So I would sometimes, have a great deal of affection, for example, for the character Astrid. The character Astrid
Oh,
in real life is someone that's very close to me. And so when I see it played by Gemma Chan, I'm just like, oh my God, you're amazing. And sometimes I have to step back and go, you know what? This is Gemma Chan. She's a professional actress. you know, she's playing a role. I need to step back, and she's not Astrid. So it does a funny thing to your mind, at least for me. But it's been a pleasure and a privilege to see this happen and to see amazing actors, bring these roles to life. It's incredible.
and we're dying to see the second one. Is there anything that you can share with us about any update on the second one?
Yeah, we're working on it full time.
Were
It's
you
what's
very
happening.
involved with the script
Oh yeah.
and the
I'm
everything?
I'm
Okay.
not writing the script. I'm not, but I'm consulting on the script. So I work with the screenwriters, and Peter
Okay.
Chiarelli, who wrote the first movie, is also working on
Okay.
the second
Okay.
movie. And so, he calls me all the time. We have lunch, we meet up. He's running ideas by me. I'm trying to help him. I'm there to advise, but I'm never there to push my agenda, because I respect that he's the one adapting this, he's creating this, he's bringing his own voice to it, and I'm just there to try to be helpful and help problem solve. But I think because the first one was so successful, and because it meant so much for so many people, especially in America, especially for Asian Americans in North America, it became this really seminal cultural moment. We really want to get it right. We don't want to rush this, so we're trying to get the script absolutely perfect and the story absolutely perfect before we shoot. And the hope is that we can start shooting next year.
Okay. Well, a lot of things going to happen to you next year,
right? Yeah. I mean,
Fingers
hopefully,
crossed.
right? Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And you talk about how the movie actually really becomes so important for a lot of Asian Americans. But I can say for us in Indonesia too, it's I can testify personally. I watched it on the cinema with a bunch of friends. And then they were like, it's full, right? I wasn't even there on the first week or something. I watched it like after the third week or something. And the whole cinema was just gasping. And I could sense that they totally could relate to this character, which is what I found amazing. I mean, probably not many people on that theater have ever flew first class or had access to this thing, but then it's Singapore, and us being Southeast Asian, it hits closer to home. And looking at these actors, beautiful and handsome as they are, and they look like us. And I think in my generation we've never had that, right? Like very rarely. Probably the last one's the Joy Club, maybe. And that was on the
Henry
90s.
Golding. Henry Golding's mother is from Sarawak, right? So he's really, culturally, it's very close. It's interesting, and it's funny because we I think we auditioned a few Indonesian actors as well for Crazy Rich Asians that didn't end up being in the movie, but next time, hopefully, maybe, but I'm so glad that it was enjoyed in Indonesia as well. That's the first time I've heard that.
Oh, it is. Like, I have so many friends that go gaga over the movies, and we just had it on a streaming service this week here.
Yeah, it just came out in Southeast Asia, from what I'm told.
Yeah, and then I've watched it again for like probably the 100 times.
Thank you. Thank you for watching.
A lot of my friends did the same, and then and to be honest, I think a lot of people in different parts of the world, maybe the States and Europe, for them, Asia is just, to look at Asian people, they would consider it Asian. They kind of miss or skip the part that the Southeast Asian identity, like they couldn't differentiate us, right? Like what, Singaporean, they look at us, look at our face, and oh, it's Chinese, period. Right? And then when you put that on the book and on the screen, and they're like, oh, there's a whole lot of Southeast Asians communities.
It really, it breaks the stereotypes, right? And it changes perceptions.
Yes. Have you heard about this before?
I'm seeing how the success of my books has really kind of opened up a lot of things, for people. For example, my books are very, very popular in Germany. For some reason, Germans love my books, which is fantastic. I love Germany too. So, but I think for them also, it's kind of, it's a revelation for them to really learn more about specifically, these cultures, the culture of Singapore, the culture of Hong Kong, Philippines. We're all very different, and we're seeing that, and that's why it was important for me in my trilogy to really spend time showcasing not just Singapore, but Thailand, Philippines, and then a little bit of Indonesia as well. In my most recent, the last book in the trilogy, Rich People Problems, there was at least one scene set in Indonesia, which to me was one of my favorite scenes to write. Very meaningful to me, because I have family in Indonesia too. So, it's my way of paying tribute to them.
Yeah, and we are very closely connected, right? Here, like in Southeast Asia, like
Yeah.
we travel and then like our food, we share so many
Hmm.
similarities, I would say. And yeah, when you showcase it in that particular trilogy and on a movie, yeah, definitely. Like all of us here can
Yeah.
relate, when like the kue,
Exactly. Yeah.
all these small things. Yeah.
Yeah. The kue lapis, for
Um,
example. I love the Indonesian kue
yeah,
lapis, you know.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about like is there any plan to feature Singapore again or in the next few books, for instance, like or the
Well, this new trilogy, the City
Asia?
Trilogy,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
is really going to be not set in Asia.
Okay.
That was my point, because after writing 3 books set in Asia, I wanted to do something different, you know.
To move.
So
Okay.
that's exactly. So this trilogy is New York, London, Paris, and then you'll see there's a few other cities in it,
Okay.
but it was
But the characters probably.
the characters, yes, absolutely. But I wanted to show Asians in other cultures. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was my goal, to show Lucy. She's half Asian, and her mother's Asian-American, but they're living in New York.
Mm,
So in the future book, the next book in London, it will be
mm,
Asians in London, Asians in
mm.
Paris. You know, and
Yeah.
then maybe after that, I might return to Asia
And
again and set new
each of
books there.
them, yeah, each of them would encounter a different experience, right? Like Lucy, like she grew up in
Yeah.
the States, right? It's a different sort of treatment, and I can only imagine what an Asian character like either like biracial or like Asian,
Mhm.
few generations raised and born probably in London and in Paris. Oh, that's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, completely different experiences, because it's totally different cultural clashes, right? So
Exactly.
that's, for
Yeah.
me, it's to look at the intersection between East and West, but to show the specific within these cultures.
Yeah.
That I think, that to me is interesting.
Yeah, and how do you feel like an Asian American in the States now during this very important year, especially in the States? How do you experience and there's a flu going on as well, which is dubbed like wrongly and politically incorrectly as
Hmm.
China flu.
Yeah, I mean,
Are you encountering this sort of
I have been very lucky.
you know?
I have not encountered anything
Yeah.
bad, but there's so many people I know, so many friends, family members who have been attacked on the streets, yelled at. It's really a problem. It's a problem when 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 there are racist people on the news, labeling
Yeah.
this a Chinese virus. Um, it doesn't help the situation at all. And it's a lot of people are suffering because of that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's very concerning, and I'm trying to do what I can to be helpful and to be
Yes.
part of the change.
Yeah, and then I think part of I'm a big reader myself, and part of
Hmm.
the fun or why reading is so much fun because you sort of like train your innate empathy, right? You can empathize with the character. How
Yeah,
else do you get absorbed to a story if you don't empathize with a character, for instance, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And
I mean,
by
I
having
should.
you
Yeah.
writing these books, right? People can relate more to the specifically like American Asian experience.
I hope so. I hope so. But in general, I really feel like Americans, are the most open, welcoming people. I've been in America now close to 4 decades, and I feel like I've been very welcomed here. I feel like most Americans are very, very progressive and forward thinking, and we are a culture of immigrants. We are a country of
Yes.
immigrants. The only people who were here that really have a right to be there were the Native Americans. Are the Native Americans, and the rest of us are all immigrants. You know, and I think there is most people respect have great respect for other cultures, other people, and they really understand that this is what America is about. There's just a very small minority that doesn't feel that way.
Small minority with a very loud voice, I suppose.
Yes, for the time being.
Unfortunately, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
hope for a different year after this, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever like having this pressure because your previous trilogy is like wildly successful? When you write the new one, do you feel this pressure to kind of like uh, have the same success?
I think for me it's the opposite. I think because the first trilogy was such a big success, I feel like now I can just relax and just play and just really write and not think about, and it hasn't stressed me out as much because I feel like I don't have to prove myself as a commercial success anymore. I can just really write something from the heart and hope that readers connect to it. So for me, it's had the success of the trilogy has really liberated me, I think, to really kind of be more open to experimenting, to trying new things, and not worrying so much about how well
And
is it going to do.
and especially bring joy to us as readers, I
Yeah,
suppose.
that's the key. The key to
During
it
the
all.
darkest time, during the
Yeah,
darkest time, even.
yeah. I still have a post-it note right here on my computer, and it says
Oh, there
joy.
you
Yeah,
go. That's
I
it.
look at it
That's
every
it.
day as I write, because that's what I'm trying to create in all my projects, in my books, and the TV shows, and the movies.
Yeah, and it's that I think that honesty translates definitely, because me as the lucky receiving end of your works, I immediately feel it like okay, all of these glitters and jet setting and exotic locales and everything, it's but at the heart of it, it's like your book has this big heart, I suppose, and something that we all can relate to despite our social status or economy or condition or whatever it is.
Thank you for saying that. I mean,
Yeah, it's
that's what I'm trying to
beautiful.
do. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I bother you to entertain us a little bit more by reading some excerpts from your new book, Sex and Vanity? I think
Sure.
we all
Absolutely.
can do some sort
Yeah.
of entertaining at this point in life, no
Sounds
matter where
good.
we are. Yeah. So yeah, the floor
Okay.
or the video is yours.
Great. So I'm going to read a chapter from my new novel, Sex and Vanity, and it's going to be chapter 6 of part 1. Da Costanzo, Capri, Italy. We're talking about sandals, right? So Olivia insisted on taking Charlotte and Lucy shopping for sandals when they had mentioned it the previous evening, but at the appointed time after lunch, only Lucy appeared in the hotel lobby. "It's just going to be me," Lucy said as she got out of the elevator. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That bad, huh?" "She can't even get out of bed. I've never in my life seen Charlotte hungover until today." "Should we even be going out when she's like this?" "Yes, she urged me to go. She said she just wants to sleep." "Poor Charlotte. Now I feel awful. I should have stopped her," Olivia said with a little laugh. "How much did she have to drink last night?" Lucy asked. She had been seated at Isabel's table during dinner at Le Grotel, a restaurant set partially inside a cave at one end and on a hillside terrace with sea views on the other. So she had no idea what Charlotte and Olivia had been up to at their end of the party. "Oh, I can't remember. You know, when wine is that good, it just tastes like candy, and you'd lose track of how many you've had." "I only had a few sips." "A few sips? Lucy, they served 2 Chateau Lafitte's and a Haute Brion last night. It was brought in especially from the Vecchi cellars. Don't tell me you only had a few sips." "Well, I don't have much of a tolerance. Unfortunately, I inherited the Asian flush gene from my mom," Lucy joked. "I see," Olivia murmured, not understanding what Lucy meant, and thinking that Charlotte had been right when she said last night that Lucy was a good kid. Her own college years in Paris had been quite a different story. The two of them walked out of the hotel, and Lucy, by habit, started veering left towards Via Ignazio Ciero. Where do you think you're going? Olivia asked. Aren't we headed to Via Camarel? Lucy asked, referring to Capri's most famous shopping street. Hell no! You can't walk through town before 5. Are you crazy? We'll be trampled to death by tourists. Locals and those of us in the know avoid town at all costs between the hours of 10 and 5, when all the hydrofoils from Sorrento and Naples arrive and spit out thousands of day trippers. Really? Lucy, trust me, don't even think of being seen in town until after 5, when the last boat has left for the day. That's when the island becomes magic again, and all the bright young things come out from hiding and head towards the piazzetta of drinks. I had no idea, Lucy said, amused by Olivia's insistence. Well, learn from me, kiddo. I've been coming to Capri every summer for years. But aren't we going to miss all the sandal shops if we avoid town? Not at all, because there's only one sandal shop you need to go to, and I'm going to take you there via the back route, where we can avoid all the huddled masses and their snotty-nosed, sticky-fingered enfants. Olivia expertly guided Lucy through a maze of back lanes, snaking behind the hotels. The quiet little streets seemed a world away from the rest of Capri, even though they were only a few blocks away from the main square. They found themselves in the heart of a neighborhood where the walls rose up high on both sides, making Lucy feel as if she were deep within a remote medieval hill town. The patina of glitz, so ubiquitous throughout the rest of Capri, had vanished. Here, the white walls were gray with dirt, and the windows didn't gleam. There wasn't a single luxury hotel or designer boutique anywhere in sight, but instead, they passed a tailor, a little grocery stall with crates of fresh produce stacked outside, and a trio of boys playing soccer along a wall. Lucy found the rustic modesty rather charming and beautiful in its own way. How did I ever miss this whole neighborhood? You think all the locals shop at Prada? This is the real hood, where the shops cater to people who actually have to live here year-round. Look at that old tailor working away in there. Isn't he absolutely adorable? And these little tykes trying to kill each other over a ball? Christ, this one's going to break his neck, Olivia observed, carefully sidestepping a laughing boy as he slammed his body full force against the wall, trying to defend the ball. As they walked by a hair salon with faded posters of models in the window that, judging by the hairstyles, hadn't been changed since the mid-1980s, Olivia continued her monologue. The true beauty of this island is in its people and all those authentic areas of off the beaten path. Think of all the tourists who only come to Capri for one day and rush around trying to see everything on the tourist map but miss all this. Or the ones who arrive at Marina Grande, take a boat out to see the Blue Grotto, and don't even realize the town of Capri is actually on top of the mountain and not part of the harbor below. I think they should actually ban day trippers and require all visitors to spend at least 3 nights on the island. There should also be a fashion assessment before they can get off the boat. No tacky tourists. Now stop! Lucy stopped dead in her tracks, suddenly alarmed. Take a deep breath, Olivia ordered. Lucy relaxed and inhaled deeply. Tell me, what do you smell? I don't really smell anything, Lucy lied politely. The odor of cat piss was so strong it made her eyes water. You're smelling the real Capri here, la vera Italia, Olivia announced before marching on. Turning down an impossibly narrow lane, they descended a flight of stone steps and found themselves in front of a tiny, unpretentious shop that looked like it had been carved into the rock face of the hill centuries ago. This is Da Costanzo, my favorite sandal maker. Lucy stepped into the shop and felt like she'd been transported into Aladdin's cave. Thousands of letter cords, buckles, and gemstones in every color imaginable hung along the walls of the shop, and arrayed all over the floor and on the shelves were the most stylish sandals Lucy had ever seen. Buongiorno, Antonio. Buongiorno, Alvina. Come stai? This is my friend Lucy from New York. Tell her what she absolutely needs to have this season. Turning to Lucy, Olivia said, now, Antonio's been making all these sandals by hand for decades. His father, Costanzo, who was the original sandal maker, touched the feet of Jackie Kennedy, Sophia Loren, and Clark Gable. Imagine that. Oh, wow, Lucy said. She tried to picture one of those legendary icons standing in the same little space she was in, but all she could think of was poor Costanzo having to handle thousands upon thousands of sweaty, stinky feet every day. Everyone is wanting the rose gold leather this year, Antonio said, reaching over from the stool where he sat making sandals every day and handing Lucy a sandal with two simple cords of shiny leather crisscrossing the big toe and wrapping around the ankle. Try it on. Feel how soft the leather is, Antonio's wife, Alvina, said with a warm smile. Lucy slipped a pair on and was amazed by how comfortable they were. So chic, so stylish, so minimalist. It's the Donald Judd of sandals. You could wear this to the beach and head straight to cocktails, Olivia pronounced. Antonio, I want one of these, please. But could you do me a pair in black leather soles? Of course, Antonio replied. Olivia suddenly caught sight of a man in a white linen jacket with a waxed mustache on the other side of the street, holding a big golf umbrella over an elderly woman swathed in a bejeweled headscarf. A few paces behind them walked two security guards in dark suits and sunglasses. Oh, it's Mordecai. I have to have a word with him about tomorrow's excursion. Olivia dashed out of the shop before Lucy could say anything. Lucy took her time leisurely trying on different styles, chatting about New York with Alvina, and getting her foot measured by Antonio. In the end, she chose two pairs of sandals for herself, one in the rose gold, but done in a dramatic gladiator style, with leather cords wrapped all the way up her calves, and a classic T-strap in pale pink suede, accessorized with two matching suede tassels. Antonio would custom make them to fit her feet perfectly and have them delivered to her hotel. She also bought tan leather flip-flops for her brother Freddie and a faux leopard print pair for her mother. 30 minutes had passed and Olivia had still not returned. Deciding not to wait any longer, Lucy paid for her purchases and walked out onto Via Roma. It was 4:30, and the street was wall-to-wall packed with tourists, dashing about in a frenzy doing last-minute shopping, catching buses, or heading for the funiculare that would take them down to the mountain to catch the last ferries. About 50 Japanese came marching along, trying valiantly to maintain an orderly line behind their tour group leader, who was holding up a stick with a yellow rubber duck on the end of it. Lucy was jostled along with the crowd for a few minutes before she darted quickly into the vestibule of a vintage jewelry shop for a moment's respite. She was a little annoyed that Olivia had abandoned her and wondered if she'd be able to find her way back to the hotel along the back lanes again. The crowd thinned out for a moment, and Lucy managed to make it to the Piazzetta without incident, where she found the last available table at the Grand Café. She sat down gratefully, placing her shopping bag on the wicker seat next to her and poring over the leather-bound menu. A silver-haired waiter in a dapper white blazer approached the table and said with a bow, "Konnichiwa." Lucy stared at him in confusion for a few moments before realizing he was greeting her in Japanese. Ni hao ma? He tried again. I'm sorry, I don't speak Chinese, she said, turning up the volume on her American accent. Ah, Americana, easy peasy. Let me guess, you want Diet Coke with ice. Lucy forced a smile. Actually, I think I'll try the granita al limone. Lemon granita, perfect for this hot day, the waiter said jovially. The sun was just cresting over the mountaintop directly in Lucy's sightline, so she put on her sunglasses. In her short white ermine dress, with the cute Bresson lace sleeves and her dark glasses on, she somehow felt very European and grown up at the moment. This is what she loved doing the most when she traveled to Europe. Sitting at an outdoor cafe, watching the world go by. Whenever they visited Paris, she always insisted on dragging her mother and Freddie to an outdoor table at La Palette, her favorite cafe in Saint-Germain, and she wished that they could be here with her right now. Lucy glanced covertly at the people seated around her. She loved checking out people and making up stories in her mind about them. On her left was a young, attractive Italian couple, looking longingly into each other's eyes. On a honeymoon, possibly? To her right were two smartly dressed men. An American guy with dark blonde hair and a blue striped t-shirt and navy blazer, talking to an Asian guy with a goatee wearing a pair of round 1930s retro-style sunglasses. They looked like they worked in fashion and were here on business. She overheard the Asian guy saying, "I need to remember to get a pair of sandals made for Alexandra and Jackie." And she wondered if it was because he noticed her shopping bag from Dagestanzo. Behind her were two middle-aged women smoking and having an intense discussion in German, while a humongous Great Dane sat quietly at their heels. Were they sisters, rehashing an old family feud? Within a few minutes, the waiter returned and placed a large glass bowl on her table, containing a mountain of slushy lemon granita, accompanied by a single thin slice of cantaloupe wedged onto the rim of the glass. Lucy smiled in delight at the dessert before her. It reminded her of the desserts she loved getting at Serendipity when she was a kid, although this presentation looked decidedly more elegant. She sat at her table, sipping the granita contentedly from the straw. It was deliciously icy, and the fresh squeezed lemon juice was so refreshingly tart as it went down her throat. She wondered if she should take a nibble of the cantaloupe now, or save it for later. After she finished the granita, when out of the corner of her eye, she saw a tall, elderly white man enter the piazza, wobble slightly, and then stumble against the table where the Italian couple were seated. The Italian man sprang up from his chair and helped the man to his feet. The old man stood for a split second, took a step forward, and then went crashing down again, his head landing right onto Lucy's dessert, breaking the glass bowl and splashing lemon granita all over her. Lucy found herself glued to her chair, unable to move. It seemed as if time had stopped. No one did a thing. The Italian couple stared helplessly at the old man. The Germans just sat there, and the waiters stood like statues. All around them were dozens of glamorous-looking people, frozen at their tables and gawking. She heard the American beside her say, "I think he's dying." And then somewhere behind her, a lady with a British accent cried, "We simply must!" The man's eyes rolled back, and she heard a rattle deep in his throat, and his face turned blue. But all she could see was red, the red blood vessels in the whites of his eyes, the red gushing from his head onto the white tablecloth. She finally stood up, and then she felt the ground beneath her spin, and everything went black. Lucy had no idea how long she'd been unconscious. Maybe it was just seconds, but when she came to, she felt something warm and soft cradling her neck. She looked up and she saw George Zhao looking down at her, and realized that his hands were cushioning her head. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, and then she turned and saw a waiter hovering over the old man, who was now lying on the floor in front of her. The waiter was pounding on the man's chest repeatedly as the Great Dane started whimpering. "Just stay here. Don't get up," George said, jumping up and heading towards the man on the ground. "Stop hitting him like that!" He pushed the waiter aside. "Someone call a doctor!" he shouted as he bent down, lifted the man's chin, and gave him 2 quick rescue breaths. Lucy got up from the ground slowly and began backing away from the scene. George was now frantically pumping the man's chest and yelling, "Fucking call a doctor!" Something within her told her that she couldn't look anymore. She couldn't stand there and watch this man die. She turned around and started walking away. The minute she rounded the corner, out of the sight of the piazzetta, she started to run.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin.
You're welcome. I've never read that before, so I'm sorry for all the mistakes.
No, it's a beautiful reading.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you for transporting us for like the most beautiful, brief moments to Capri. That's all what we needed right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for your time once again. Thanks for joining us at Kembali 20.
It's really, really such a pleasure. I hope I can
It's a
be there
pleasure.
in person another year.
In another year. Let's hope so. So yeah, find Kevin Kwan's latest book, Sex and Vanity, in any local bookstore around you. Support your local bookstore. That's important. And thanks for joining us. Bye, Kevin.
Thank you. Bye. Be safe.
You too. Kembali 20 was made possible with the support of the Yayasan Mudra Swari Saraswati Patron Program and their donors. The Patron Program was created to seek assistance for the survival of both festival and the foundation. By making a valuable contribution to the Yayasan Patron Program, you will be directly involved in delivering both festivals in due time. Your contribution will guarantee the future of Indonesia's most meaningful cross-cultural platform of words, ideas, cultures, and the creative arts. Follow at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit ubudwritersfestival.com for more information about the Patron program.